there are some sports magazines in the reuse it bin, said Megan. You want to see if there are any pictures of basketball players? No. Well, I guess, said Evan, embarrassed that he was tongue-tied. When Megan and Evan were in the same desk group, neither one of them could get any work done. Mrs. Overton had called it a lovely problem, and Evan was both disappointed and relieved when she'd changed the seating arrangements. Whenever he talked to Megan, he got a strange spinning feeling in his stomach, and it was getting worse every day. It was just like the time 2 winters ago when he and his mother hit a patch of black ice in their old Subaru. The car spun around 360 degrees before smashing into a guardrail. No one was hurt, and even the car was okay once it had been repaired, but Evan would never forget that feeling of spinning and spinning completely out of control, waiting for the smash. Being around Megan felt like that. Evan walked over to the reuse it bin. It turned out that there were tons of photos of basketball players, including one of Evan's favorite, Rajon Rondo, who was famous for having played the 4th quarter of a playoff game one-handed after he dislocated his elbow in the 3rd. Evan quickly cut out 5 photos and stuck them on the 4 sides and top of his box. Done, he said, putting the cap back on his glue stick and shoving his markers into his desk. Mrs. Overton, who'd been working at her desk, glanced up at the clock on the wall. Hey, look at the time. She picked up the shake-array that sat at the edge of her desk and shook it a few times, making the gentle shh-shh-shh sound that meant it was time to transition to a different activity. We're running late. Leave your boxes on your desks and come to the rug. It's time for the poem of the day. Evan smiled. He would never admit it, but this had become his second favorite part of the day, after recess. Ever since coming back from winter break, Mrs. Overton had taken the time each day to read a poem. Just one poem. A serious poem. Not like the silly poems his 3rd-grade teacher had read to them last year. Evan liked those, too. They made him laugh. But these poems that Mrs. Overton read were different. They were like music, and they made something deep inside of him go zing. Jessie raised her hand. Mrs. Overton, can I skip the poem of the day so I can work on my newspaper? Jessie had started her own classroom newspaper called the 4-0 Forum. She had already published 2 issues, and now she was working on the 3rd. She planned to hand out the next edition on Monday, exactly 1 week from today, which happened to be Valentine's Day. It was a tight deadline, and Evan could tell she was feeling the pressure. No, Jess, I'll give you some time during morning recess. For now, come and join the class. When everyone had gathered on the rug sitting cross-legged, Mrs. Overton said, Today I'm going to read a poem by E. Cummings. At the top of a blank page on the classroom easel, she wrote E. Cummings. Is he dead? Asked David Kerkorian. This had become the first question the kids in 4-0 asked whenever Mrs. Overton introduced a new poet. Some poets were still alive, like the one who wrote the poem about the tree frog whose throat was swollen with spring love, or that other one who wrote about playing basketball with his friend Spanky. But a lot of them were dead. Some of them had been dead for centuries. He died about 50 years ago, said Mrs. Overton. A few kids nodded. A long time dead. The really famous poets like William Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson were all dead. What's the poem called? Asked Sally. It doesn't have a title. What do you mean? Asked Jessie. Evan could see a frown creeping across her face. Jessie did not like poetry, even though she'd won a poetry writing contest in 1st grade. It was the only subject in school that Evan had ever heard her say she hated. Some poems don't have titles, and E. Cummings didn't title most of his poems. A poem is no good without a title, said Jessie. She stuck her foot out and retied her sneaker with several sharp, jerky movements. And what kind of a name is E.E.? It's initials, right? Said Jack. Like J.K. Rowling. It stands for something. Easter eggs, said Megan. 11 elephants, said Ben. Extra elbows, said Ryan. He was sitting next to Evan, and he poked his elbow into Evan's chest, which got everyone in the class laughing.